Okay, so I'm a radio guy, so it's very odd for me to be able to use pictures. So I cannot tell you how much time I spent selecting for you the most exquisitely detailed, important pictures to tell this story about the adventures of the Voyager craft over the last 46 years. And I appreciate that not everyone in the room has been alive for that period. Yeah. So, first important picture. This is where it, yeah, I mean, look, that's a fine measure there. You've got to say. This is where it started for me. You know, I was born in 71. You know, we were still sending people to the moon. It was an exciting time. Computers were like, took up rooms. We didn't have them. I grew up in the west of Melbourne. We didn't have shit. But Star Trek was inspirational to me, and this guy is where the story starts for me, because in 1979, my mother took me to see Star Trek the Motion Picture. Have any of you seen that? Fuck, it was long, wasn't it? Anyway, but there was this threat to Earth. There was this large cloud-like object. It was actually about 83 AUs wide, apparently. Now, people in the theatre didn't really get what that was about, but that was 80 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. That's big. So they had to send Kirk out to take care of this sucker, right? And when he got there and he flew inside, he found something kind of unusual. I'll show you. So, much to his surprise, he found this object in the very middle. And this alien race had built this entire structure to bring this thing back to Earth. This looked very familiar to me. I thought, interesting. He went up to it, had a look, and there was some writing on the side. And it had been calling itself Voyager for ages. Now, this was an advanced civilization, but they weren't very good at cleaning. And thankfully, Kirk, with the shirt off, you know, he used the shirt, cleaned off this, and it said Voyager 6. I thought, wow, Voyager 6. So I went out, bought a book. Got this book in 1979, printed in Italy, right? Where all the good books used to come from. Do you remember those days? You know? Yeah. And started reading up about Voyager. I was really pissed off to find out that there was only 2 of them. There was no 6. 6 never came about. There was Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. This is what they actually look like. And it's weird. I'd show you a picture of both of them, but they were both identical. So you wouldn't learn much. But this is quite an amazing piece of technology. The dish here is about 3.7 meters wide. So you can imagine it would fit on this stage. It's not huge. They made 2 of these. Okay. So let's go back. This guy. It's important we know who this guy is. He was in the 60s. His name is Gary. All right. Now, Gary did some calculations that were very important back in the 60s. He was a grad student, but he worked out something that most of us from my generation know, and that was the 80s were damn special, right? And not just because of Back to the Future and Wham, but for other reasons. Now, I want you to get a bit of an idea of what they were trying to do here. They wanted to send a spacecraft out to look at the outer planets, to look at Jupiter, to look at Saturn, what's that? Uranus, not mine, and Neptune. Okay, I grew up in the West, come on. To do that, though, you've got to think of the scale of our solar system. The Earth is 150 million kilometres from the sun, okay? Now, start doing your calculations here. Does anyone know how far Jupiter is from the sun? Anyway, let's do it a different way. Let's call the Earth-Sun distance 1, okay? That's 1. Jupiter is therefore 5. All right, follow along. Saturn is 10. Uranus is 20. Neptune is 30. And Pluto is 40. Right. It's actually interesting. These ratios are really simple. You can remember them. 5 for Jupiter, 10 for Saturn, 20 for Uranus, and 30 for Neptune. Now, these are immense distances. So if you want to go and explore them all, you better hope that they're all on the same side of the solar system at the same time. Otherwise, you've got to send probes all over the place, and it'll take decades. Gary worked out that this was going to happen in the 80s. So that was amazing back in the 60s. So they started planning this idea of sending some probes out to the outer planets. And that's when they started building the Voyager probes to do this, right? So this is Voyager 2, looks exactly the same as Voyager 1, being hoisted up onto one of the rockets that launched them. So, when did this all occur? Well, Voyager 2, weirdly, launched first. Voyager 1 launched second, but it was called Voyager 1 because it got to the outer planets first. Now, as we all know, it's very important which one we shoot off first. Who shoots first is an important question, especially back in the 80s. You just ask this guy, right? You can buy T-shirts about that now. My mum says I was launched about 6 years earlier. Wasn't a good experience for her. Then we went on this grand tour, a grand tour of the solar system. So what happened was we started off in the late 70s, okay, when Voyager 1 and 2 both got to Jupiter. Then they headed off to Saturn. And then there was a bit of a gap because remember the 5, 10, 20, 30, starting to get some fairly large distances. Voyager 2 was the only one that went to Uranus and Neptune. Voyager 1 specifically couldn't do that, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. It's about the same time when we get to the end there. That was when I finished my VCE. So, and some of you, anyone in the room old enough to remember this? Yeah, a few people. There was this big dust storm that came in over Melbourne. It was full on. I was looking out my grade 6 classroom window at that in the west, and we just kissed our asses goodbye. We didn't know what was happening. It was pretty bad. Voyager 1 approaches Jupiter, and all of a sudden, we see this dynamic world that we didn't know existed. The images before that didn't show the speed of these clouds, didn't show anything about the planet in terms of how dynamic it was. One thing you might not realize is, on Earth here, a day is 24 hours. On Jupiter, it's 10. This thing is enormous. And it does a spin once every 10 hours. It's a very, very dynamic world. It's incredible. And Voyager 1 started taking images of this. We learned a whole lot from the Voyager probes collectively about Jupiter. We learned that it had a ring system. We didn't know that. We knew about Saturn's, but we didn't know about Jupiter's. We also found that some of its moons, like Io, actually had active volcanoes, more active volcanoes than any other part of our solar system. Amazing. Now, sadly, you can't go. If you'd gone there with Voyager and you're unprotected, you would have got 1,000 times the lethal dose of radiation while you were there. So we can't go there, but we can send other stuff there. We also managed to get images of some of these amazing moons that we're still talking about now. So Europa and Ganymede. Ganymede, remember that name? Biggest sucker in the solar system, biggest moon, much bigger than ours. And Europa, frozen ice top. Who knows what's underneath? Really exciting. They're sending a craft up soon. If you go onto the JPL website, you can watch time-lapse photos of these little guys running around making it. It's really cool. They're doing it right now. My wife caught me doing it today, and there's a little bit of shame. Yeah. Anyway. Saturn, she's American, so I say, hey, I'm just having pride in your people. Anyway, Saturn was the next target, of course, that they went to. Amazing stuff. Started seeing some really cool aspects of Saturn. My favourite moon in the whole solar system, Enceladus. This is amazing. I'll show you another picture of it later. It's got this ice crust underneath, water, liquid water, and there's bucket loads of it. It's really cool. This was the first image we took of it, though, from one of the Voyager craft. Now, when I was a kid, I once went on a school camp in Year 9, and on the way up to Great Keppel Island on a shitty bus, I actually bought 2 posters when we stopped at the Parkes Observatory. And I carried these suckers all the way up on this long trip and all the way back. It was all I could afford, didn't have a lot of money. The one on the left and the one on the right. It took me a while to work out that it was a collage of images, wasn't one photograph. I think the shadows gave it away eventually. It took me about 5 years to work that out. And this one, can you see this one? That's no moon, right? Look up Mimas, the moon Mimas. It is the Death Star, people, I'm telling you. It looks like the Death Star. Anyway, these were posters on my room when I was a kid. Amazing stuff. Anyway, then we get to Uranus. Took a few years, but we got there, and we started seeing all these new things. We found all these new moons we didn't know existed. Remember the 5, 10, 20, 30? We're out at 20 now. The light levels are pretty damn low, and this planet is not that big. It's not like Jupiter. This is only about 4 times the size of Earth. And the moons are pretty small. So we didn't really know what that looked like. We didn't know at all. All these different moons, and we found that the ring system it had these shepherding moons. So moons either side of the ring that held the ring in place gravitationally. That was a really cool discovery we didn't know about. That was in 86. And then we got to Neptune. The winds on Neptune are over 1,100 kilometers per hour. Amazing stuff. So far out from the sun. You know, this is really dim. So think about this. This craft is flying past. It has to take photos, and to do that, it has to be super steady. In fact, it has to be so accurate that it holds the position of the camera better than 30 times the hour hand on a clock. Some of you know what that is, an hour hand on a clock, right? It's got to be that perfect, otherwise it just blurs, right? So we found that it had some beautiful rings as well, had some amazing moons. All of these things were coming out of the Voyager craft. No craft had been to these planets before. Really cool stuff. Then, as it was leaving our solar system, so it's now at not 5, 10, 20, 30, but 40. So where if Pluto was on that side of the solar system, which it wasn't, it would be heading past Pluto at this time. Voyager turned around, Voyager 2, turned around and said, I'll take a photo of the whole lot, or a series of photos. And that's what it did, and you probably may have seen this one before. This is the famous pale blue dot photo that Carl Sagan talked about so much. Really amazing photo of us from around the orbit of Pluto. Now, Voyager 1 didn't go the same way to the other planets because it wanted to look at one of Saturn's moons called Titan, which is the only place we know other than Earth that has lakes and rivers, not of water, stuff you want to drink, but has this thick atmosphere, really interesting. To do that, it had to go past Titan in a certain orbit and headed off in a different direction, couldn't go past Uranus and Neptune. Okay, so it was the 80s, man. Laserdiscs were big. I went out and I bought this sucker, right? I've still got it. My wife says, what's that word that you use when people hang on to too much shit? Collector, thank you. Yeah. I've still got this Laserdisc. It had all the data from the Voyager probes. It's great. I'm thinking of hooking it up later tonight and watching it again. Anyway, it was interesting because when I got this cost me a fortune, about a week's wage, to buy this thing. And I remember my brothers saying, you are a dickhead. Why did you... But of course, there was another disc stuck to the Voyager craft. Both of them had a message that we would send out to any intelligent life that came across these probes. And they were recorded on these gold discs. And these discs, for me, have really special meaning because one of the things that you'll see here is this little map, okay? This is a map that tells any alien species using pulsars, a series of pulsars, how to find us and come and kill us. You've all seen that film, right? But it's special meaning to me because one of the most amazing interviews I've ever had the pleasure of conducting was with a woman named Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell, and she was the discoverer of the pulsar, and her supervisor, her male supervisor, won the Nobel Prize for that, and this has never been corrected. And I've interviewed her twice, 20 years apart, and she was the one who came up with the information that went on something that we've sent out beyond our solar system. So to me, that is really amazing. We also taught them how to count. There was all sorts of things. We actually included the stylus in the probe, and we showed them how to use it. And we even said, you know, if you start using it and the first image that you get is not a circle, you fucked it up. So really clear instructions, and this thing is going to last forever, really long time. So where are they now? Well, I grabbed this snapshot from a NASA website just a few weeks back. You can see here, if you want to get a feel for it, you know, Uranus, Neptune. Here's the New Horizons probe that just went past Pluto a few years back, gave us all those beautiful love heart images. Remember they came out on Valentine's Day? That's NASA. They're smart. But Voyager 1 is now so far out that the signals from it take 22 hours at the speed of light to get back to us. That's wild. That's a long way. For reference, speed of light down the left-hand corner. Okay, it's damn fast. Voyager 2 took a different route, 18 light hours away. This is a really long way. Okay, so in more realistic terms, Voyager 1 and 2 have left what we call the heliosphere. This is the area where the sun's influence, so the solar wind, its magnetic fields and stuff, kind of end, and interstellar space starts to be the dominant feature. And we know this because these craft are still taking measurements of their environment and sending that information back 46 years later. Incredible. How do they do it? You know, I can't get my iPhone to work for more than a couple of days. Well, there's nothing like a radioactive plutonium isotope to keep you going. So this is a simple device. Basically, the plutonium decays, it gives off heat, a thermocouple converts that into electricity, and that runs Voyager, okay? Problem we've got now, though, is that the half-life of plutonium is 87.7 years. These things were supposed to be in operation for about 4 or 5 years. So if you think of half-life, that's when half of it has decayed, half of the plutonium is almost gone now. That, along with some of the gases used for orienting the spacecraft, are running out, and some of the wiring and so forth is decaying, means that we're down, instead of the 470 watts of power, down to about 250, which means for these craft to keep going and sending back information, we've had to turn off a whole lot of its systems. Some of them we don't care because they were the cameras, but some of them we do care. So just to recap, where are we? Left-hand side, Uranus and Neptune. They're the pictures taken by Voyager. In the middle, Hubble Space Telescope. What an amazing device. Great stuff. Now it's the year of the James Webb Telescope. Cool stuff, but for me, still better when you're there, right? The ones on the left, especially Neptune, the best stuff. Let's have a look at a new picture of Jupiter from the Juno craft that has just been there in the last few years. You won't have seen this like this before. That's what Jupiter looks like from the arse. Right? We're used to seeing the side. That's the butt. See that big black hole there? Not a hole. That's the shadow from the moon Ganymede, that big sucker. Right? That's what we can now see. Amazing stuff. Enceladus, my favourite moon of Saturn, you can almost see that's a crust of ice on top of water. It's leaking. With the Webb telescope, this is just in the last couple of weeks, they've shown that it's leaking in a like torus shape around Saturn, leaving water behind. They can see the water. Amazing stuff. So that's where we need to go. Look for life. Look for intelligent life that we haven't found on Earth. You can do some amazing shit from your backyard, astronomy sort of things. I do this. I think my pictures are better than the stuff from the James Webb. I can tell you what, there's about $3,000 worth of gear there. I didn't spend as much as they spent. For me, the fact that the Voyager craft are still operating 46 years later, it says, true, they don't make them like they used to. There's a reason for that, though. It's because the technology was crap back then, and we've got better cameras now. That's why we don't make them like they used to. But the precision with which these engineers did this has lasted beyond all expectations. The coolest part is that to run the instruments, you have to heat them out in space, keep them warm. The power has been shut off to some of them. They were so well made that even in the coldness of space, many of those instruments are still running. The engineers have been stunned by this. Excited, but stunned. So I'm hoping one day I'll be able to come back and speak to you on Voyager's 50th, because we're only about 4 years away from that, and they're still going strong and still sending back information. Think of these little guys out there, a lonely place in space, sending back this tiny amount of data, but still telling us that they're working and they're recording information that's relevant. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, what a talk. I wasn't so sure what I should expect from your talk, but that was just amazing. And some of the images, Amazing.
The Kirk one. You like the Kirk one?
Absolutely. Now, do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, got one very keen person at the front here. Go for it. Go for it.
Hi Shane, thank you for the wonderful talk. I was really interested in when you were talking about when they had to start shutting off certain measurement sensors and all that. Can you tell us more about what they've decided to retain in terms of what data they were capturing and why?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. There's a lot of things they don't need. So for example, all the planetary equipment where you would take photographs and measure aspects of planets, which was earlier on the thing, there are no planets where the craft are now, so there's no point in having those on. But the ones that still matter are the ones that measure things like magnetic fields and particle counts, because they tell you what sort of environment you're in. So for example, are we still seeing the high energy particles from the sun in these regions, or are we seeing something different? So a really cool part is where that bubble around the sun starts to sort of push up against the rest of space. That part gets a bit compressed and it changes the temperature. And so the Voyager craft have been able to measure some of these things and say, okay, we're now in that region right before it ends, and now they're outside of that region and they can tell the difference. So it's mainly the sort of particle counting, the very sophisticated stuff that was less interesting when they were near Jupiter, but more interesting now. So that's what they're prioritising, yeah.
Very cool. Any more questions? Another one right at the front, and I will get to the ones at the back in a second. Where are they going if there's nothing there?
Yeah, well, in fact, they're moving relatively fast, but it will take them, forever in terms of our lifetimes to reach another star system. But that was never the goal, remember. The trajectory was to go past the planets, and then they've just headed off beyond that. There is very little out there but interstellar space. But interstellar space and that environment is not something we can measure with a telescope. You have to be there locally to measure it. And these are the only craft that we have in operation that are doing that. So that's pretty amazing, yeah.
Pretty cool. And maybe I'll take one from the back because it's usually hard to see. Sorry, Luke, can I get some lights? Oh, yes, Mirren. How do they get the information back to Earth?
Yeah, so remember at the start I said it had a 3.7 metre antenna there. That is called a high gain antenna, and it uses power to shoot back a signal, basically a radio signal, just like I would use on a Sunday on my show. And the very large telescopes here, radio telescopes, pick up that signal. It's incredibly, incredibly faint. In fact, just a few years back, they had to upgrade some of our tracking stations here on Earth to make sure they could still pick up Voyager signals because they were becoming too weak. But it is a needle in a haystack. I mean, I could give you analogies, but it's essentially like, you having a candle and standing on the other side of the city and me trying to see it. It is so small, the signal now. It's requiring upgrades to some of our biggest telescopes, like the ones we have in Canberra. Yeah.
Very cool. More questions? Yeah, in the middle there.
Yeah.
The memory of them you're saying? Yep.
Yeah, look, the memory, if you think of if I took these images for you and I started blowing them up, you'd see them pixelate very quickly, the original Voyager images. One of the things that Voyager had, which was really quite sophisticated, though, it had a tape recording system, and so it would record certain images, a certain amount, and then it would start sending it back immediately. And that was part of the way they kind of shunt it out. So if you go and grab Voyager now, it doesn't have those photographs that it took in its memory. They're long gone. They've long since been sent back to us. So, yeah.
Very cool. Any more questions in the audience? Oh, we've got so many. Yep, we'll go in the middle there. How do you turn off the functions on the Voyager?
Well, how do they select which ones?
Selective.
Yeah, so Voyager, even back when it was built, had quite a sophisticated computer system. Not like what we would, nothing like my watch, but very sophisticated. And so what they can do is they can send a signal to Voyager, give it instructions and tell it, we want you to shut down this power supply for this function. And it will then do that. And Voyager has one of the fastest response times in terms of its own automated system. So, for example, if it starts having a problem, it will shut down its own instruments before we even know that it's having a problem. It's that quick. So the engineering was very sophisticated, even back in the 70s when they were building them. Yeah.
Very cool. I actually have a question, Shane.
Yeah.
If you could go back 40 years and incorporate a modern day technology into these Voyagers, what would it be?
High-res camera. Look, I think, no, look, there's a couple of things actually. One would be the sort of camera systems we now have, because I think that's something that you can do better. But the second would be spectroscopic capabilities that are much better. So what I mean by that is the ability to determine what something is made of by the light that it gives off. So the reason we know that Enceladus is leaking water is the Webb telescope has amazing spectroscopy. It sees the light coming from that region of space, and it can determine that light has come from water or reflected off water. And so that's something that a far more sophisticated version of the old Voyager craft would be great.
Yeah, that would be super cool. All right, I think we've got time for one more question. I did see some more hands, so someone super quick. Maybe at the back there, yep. All right, so it's really cool, but what can we use this for?
Yeah, look, I think for me, what I love about this is that every time we learn something about other bodies in the solar system, we learn more about how the Earth may have formed and why we have the things that we have here on Earth, like whether it be water or rock or whatever else. And Voyager has taught us a huge amount about the way other objects have formed in the solar system. So, for example, even simple things like, do we only get volcanoes on Earth? And Voyager told us no, actually something a long way out has volcanoes. Is the only way you can get heat for life from the sun? No, actually you get heat interchange from all sorts of things around the Jupiter system because of the tugging of the gravitational fields and so forth that mean that some of those planets have sort of ice on the outside, but they're liquid underneath. We've learned a lot about our own planet by looking at these other sort of planetary bodies that we wouldn't have otherwise known. So, and there's always going to be a part of it is just, what are these objects that we're surrounded by? Are they boring things out in there, or are they like we've just discovered with Pluto, this incredible dynamic world that we for centuries have thought was just a blob of dead ice? And now we know different. So does it change, what we grow and what we do here on Earth? No, but it does tell us that there are, possibilities for life in other parts of our solar system. In fact, they could even be the origins of life in other parts of our solar system for what we have on Earth.
So cool. All right, if everyone can join me in thanking Dr. Shane. Shane...